Welcome, fellow Trekkies. Today I'm going to discuss Star Trek Discovery's third season premiere, That Hope Is You, Part 1. My review will assume that you've already watched this episode, so if you haven't, please go and do so now. The Writers Guild of America originally released the title of this episode without the Part 1, at the time when the name of the next episode was yet to be decided. As for this episode's narrative, much as Burnham says in the installment itself, it's a super cool story, it's just in a completely devastating way. I'll start by saying I highly approve of how the setting changed to the 32nd century sets this third season apart from the show's past two seasons. As some people online have commented, the futuristic technology depicted on Discovery, such as significantly more widespread usage of holographic projections than usual on Trek, could have been a better fit if the series had been set post-Voyager. This season, Discovery seems to be based on this episode, taking that idea and running with it. It's fantastic to see the show portray an even more technologically advanced time period than it usually does. I love the cute little holographic bird clock in the opening scene. It simply but effectively indicates the passing of time, and its chirping, accompanied by a blackened screen, makes for an interesting start to the episode. In the first scene, I also like how, without any dialogue spoken but with the inclusion of diegetic classical music, the Federation liaison character, Sahil, is portrayed as sophisticated, with a fascination for relics of the past. The debris field the book flies through in the teaser raises some intriguing questions about what happened there, and if the wreckage is from the space battle or the burn. Let me know in the comment section what you think it might be. I didn't much like the rapid-fire Star Wars-like action sequence between Book's ship and Cosmo's vessel, but I did like Book's characterization in this episode, especially when he tells Cosmo to open your damn mind, as that's basically one of the core messages of Star Trek. I also like the design of Book's ship, as well as the fact he speaks English whereas Cosmo talks in an alien tongue, subtly indicating usage of the universal translator. It's great to see a character in such a respectable role who has a British accent. It's a relatively minor point, but I like that the effect of the wormhole opening is consistent with the previous season's visual effects. The sequence in which Burnham falls is very effective at making the viewer feel like they're in the scene. I also like that we see Hima's ecosystem, including colourful insects on the planet's surface and a flock of birds flying through the air. The panoramic landscape shots of Hima in this installment were filmed in Iceland. In my opinion, they look amazing and even cinematic, so I'm pleased the Discovery's production crew decided to shoot there. I also really liked the music during Burnham's crash, as well as the sound design when she then recovers. 3188 doesn't seem right to me given Discovery's previous chronology. I suspect it should be 3186 or 3187, but I love Burnham's enthusiasm at finding life in that future. It really feels like she's overjoyed that life has managed to thrive, in defiance of the threat of the AI control. The fact that she self-destructs the Red Angel suit I found interesting, since that could have surely had further potential. I think it's cool that for the first time this episode establishes her serial number. I also like how new imagery has been added to the opening credit sequence. However, bearing in mind the change of the show's setting, as well as how the theme music accompanying the opening titles changed in Deep Space Nine's fourth season and Enterprise's third season, I was kind of hoping for a reorchestration of Discovery's main theme music in this episode. The theme's culmination in the original series fanfare by Alexander Courage now seems slightly out of place. Early in the episode, the so-called Easter egg references to long-established elements, such as the Gorn and dilithium, are great at reminding the viewer that this is still Star Trek. Also, I liked Book quirkily referring to Burnham as Rocket Girl. It reminds me of how, in reality, it was of huge importance to Gene Roddenberry that the Enterprise, often colloquially personified as a female, wouldn't be a rocket ship. At first, Burnham's speech made me think the episode's title was referring to Book, though it's made clear in the episode's final scene that it actually refers to Burnham herself. I love the introduction of Book's beautiful Maine Coon cat, Grudge. I'd been hoping, since Discovery is first announced as a forthcoming series, that the show would feature a regular pet, similar to Spot in The Next Generation and Porthos and Enterprise, so I'm delighted that this is indeed now happening. The explanation that Byrne refers to the day that most of the lithium in Book's words just went boom makes perfect sense to me. Whereas I'd seen internet theories that the burn might refer to an incident involving the Omega particle, I always doubted this, as it would be too reliant on specific past canon, especially when the makers of the series have already done that sort of storytelling, featuring elements from specific parts of the canon, in the past season. It seems clear to me that the makers of the series are taking concepts that are core to Star Trek's premise and then toying with them, much like how Deep Space Nine did. The idea of exploring what the Federation is in absence of starships or warp drive fits into this category in a way that the disaster involving the Omega particle wouldn't, and dilithium is a more canonically general way to account for such a situation. The link between the burn and dilithium also connects to the fact that the lithium crystals in opening titles are now red rather than green. I think the design of Requiem looks cool and sort of District 9-esque. The status of collaboration between the Andorians and the Orions makes sense to me, given that they are introduced as enemies in the original series episode Journey to Babel. This reflects how Alex Kurtzman, who co-wrote this episode, had a hand in depicting Kirk and Spock as initially rivals in the 2009 Star Trek movie, even though they obviously later become best friends. The sequence at the Andorian/Orion checkpoint reminded me of sequences at the Romulan/Borg checkpoints in Star Trek Picard. I liked the Andorian costumes, evidently taking cues from the frozen wasteland nature of the natural habitat on Andoria. Discovery's portrayal of the Orions as traders harkens back to the Orion trade outpost in Kronos in the show's first season finale, Will You Take My Hand? The portable minimized transporters are a logical progression from large-scale personal transporters in Star Trek Picard and in the Kelvin timeline Star Trek Beyond. Burnham's behaviour after being sprayed with the truth serum is a highly comedic sequence, and I actually laughed out loud. A line I find particularly funny is when she summarises the second season by commenting, "I saved all the things." In general, it was brilliant to see Burnham essentially carry an entire episode herself, and it's clear that she's meant to represent the audience's perspective of being unfamiliar with this time period, as well as the tech and characters she meets along the way. However, it's also great to see her reference Tilly while being questioned by an Andorian guard and an Orion one. Indeed, I find Burnham's determination to find her crew and ship to be admirable. I was genuinely surprised to see Cosmo return, although since it fleshed out its character a bit more, maybe I shouldn't have been. I also liked that some of his remarks were about Grudge directing his insults to something his victim cares about, rather than just always directed at the person himself, much like how Crack's offends the Enterprise to Scotty in The Trouble with Tribbles. The tension followed by a charged hand weapon battle in the industrial area involving Andorians brings to my mind a particular scene in the Enterprise season finale, Days of the Voyages. During my first watch of this episode, I found the visual effects in the battle were a bit confusing. Footage of the running aliens who chase Book and Burnham was released prior to this episode. I'd imagined two possibilities, one being the situation we got with them chasing Burnham and Book. The other idea I had was that they were perhaps militia, which the pair of main characters were actually helping, and were grassroots efforts to restart the Federation, perhaps toward the mid or end part of the season. I think that concept would have worked slightly better, given the Federation and ruins aspect of this season's plot. On the other hand, I do like how it was included so early in the season, so the viewer knows to instead focus on other upcoming elements. I felt that vaporizing many of the alien guards into oblivion rather than stunning them into unconsciousness was too extreme. Cosmo's death similarly comes across as somewhat uncalled for, as well as very sudden, but it was great to see a Lurian from the same species as DS9's Morn among the group of aliens. Book's chemistry with Burnham works well, and his connections to nature are endearing in my opinion, but I was disgusted when he administers Burnham's arm wound with the handkerchief he's just admitted he regularly uses for blowing his nose. I love that this episode acknowledges the temporal Cold War featured in Star Trek Enterprise, and that you don't necessarily have to be familiar with that series to take meaning from this line. The character of Book doesn't appear to always do things by the book, however Sahil presumably does, so I don't really understand why, when he realises Burnham's a time traveller, he doesn't either arrest her or report her to the authorities. It should probably be noted that this is the second season premiere in a row to feature one of the main characters being swallowed, then spat out by a large and otherwise friendly alien. I love seeing the appearance of the warp effect when the Nautilus is depicted at warp and Grudge meanwhile purring. When Burnham tells Sahil who she is, I love the expression on his face as he reacts with extreme surprise and reverence. I've seen some complaints online about the portrayal of Burnham in this episode seeming out of character. However, I find that a bit ridiculous given that she goes through a life-changing sequence of events, having to leave many people she's known hundreds of years behind in the past, as well as the fact she's sprayed with a mind-altering substance. I thought this episode would have benefited from featuring a shocking twist ending, or even a shot establishing the condition that the USS Discovery is now in. Ultimately, I enjoyed this installment. It will be interesting to discover how the show will develop from now on. Let me know in the comment section what you think of this episode. Where do you think Discovery is? And do you think Sahil is human, or possibly an android, or even a hologram? I hope you enjoyed this review. If so, click the like button and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye for now.